to CrossPlatform podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud,
And I'm Mark Gelwicks.
and today we are going back to 1990. Oh, well, not exactly, but we are going to be talking about personal digital assistants. And actually, I
Yep.
may say that my first personal digital assistant is before 1990s. My
hmm
first one, it was ninth grade. Oh yeah, shy of 1990, and it was a Sony data bank. Uh,
Yep.
that was my first thing. I was in ninth grade. The previous thing that I had before that, it was a book that was what my dad used. There was a calendar, basically a calendar book, with one page per day, and that didn't work for me at all.
hmm
Paper failed on me before. um, um, that was my first one. It was a Sony. You could not back up. So when that thing delete, you lose everybody's contacts.
Oh yeah.
It was
Yeah.
terrible in that sense.
I think my first devices. I was trying to go back and think how far back. Radio Shack had a pocket computer, what they called a pocket computer, which was basically just a large scientific calculator that had alphanumeric keyboard on it and a little bit of memory. You could program in BASIC just a little bit on it. And I think that was probably the very first device I had my hands on. Little credit card contact lists and things like that, but nothing of any major substance before that particular device. That was the first real one. And I was doing some nosing around in this because we talk about PDAs all the time and where we came from as a technology and where we are now and where things are actually going. So just out of curiosity, I looked up, what does Wikipedia think was the first PDA? And what's written in there is that the first PDA was released in 1984 by Scion, who then followed that initial release with what's called their Scion Series 3 in 1991. I had a Scion Series 3, and it was actually a very interesting little device because nowadays it is very reminiscent of the form factor of like the Samsung Galaxy flip phones. It was that clamshell style design. Difference was it had an LCD screen, it ran off of two AA batteries, and it had little chiclet keys for a keyboard. So you could actually type on the thing. And it had a calendar and it had notepads, had a calculator in it. It was a very interesting device and it fit in a jacket pocket. I mean, there was no difficulty there. So that as a starting device, I mean, when we go back to that time period, 1991, 1992, very early 90s, when PDAs first really started to get their feet under them as something that could legitimately be used, um, it's funny to see the early adopters, guys like you and me and the others who went immediately and grabbed these things and say, what can I make them do? What paces can I put them through? Now, that's not what people would picture as a PDA nowadays. Nowadays, they would picture if you asked them what a PDA was, and if they even knew, but if you asked them what a PDA was, they would probably think of something like a Palm Pilot.
Mhm.
So, when did you have your first Palm Pilot? Do you recall?
Yes, I got my first Palm Pilot in 1995.
Okay.
Um, what I didn't remember was the cost. So the Palm Pilot Professional, that was my first Palm Pilot, was around $399 when they came to the market. Um, and that was the equivalent, we can cry together, of more than a month of salary. Okay,
hmm
at my time. So it took me around that long for me to get um, the first Palm Pilot Professional, and uh, and I really love that machine. I that was, I really wanted a Newton, but the Newton, if you remember, was around 2,000 bucks. There was no
Yes.
way. Okay, it would require me a whole year of savings. I didn't have that maturity. Okay, the other one was possible.
Hmm.
So I learned to. I didn't have a computer at that time. I We have a PC at home that we shared, but I did not have my computer or a laptop. So that was my main device. That was my computer. I have that thing, and I have a Motorola P550 that you may remember with a big thing.
Hmm.
And that's really the beginning of me hacking into things, because that was the device I had and the device I can play with. So I had an external keyboard. And I mean, IT strength was not what it is now. So I installed the Palm Pilot software in the computer of the office so I can sync my notes in the office, and then I can take notes. I was a paralegal at the time. So I was a fancy guy taking notes in that thing in, in court. I took classes, notes in court, and I really explode that Palm Pilot to the max. It is something that I had Palm Pilots all the way until the iPhone. So 10 years of Palm Pilots. I had
Hmm.
different models. Um, I earned a Palm Pilot 5. I don't know if you remember, that one was the first one, was metal and really, really thin. It
Oh
was a
yeah.
beautiful machine. And I earned that one in a job, and I was so excited. I
Hmm.
don't know if this guy, I was very cheap or very expensive, but he was open to it, and I was open to go for
Hmm.
that deal at that time. So, and that was my beginning with the story of the Palm Pilot.
It's interesting when you look at the timeline of these devices, and specifically what we're talking about here with things like the Palm Pilots. The Newton, the Apple Newton, came out in 91. I think it was 92.
Mm-hmm.
92. Let's see. Yes, in 92. And you're right, it had a massive price tag, especially attached to it at the time. It was also a big device. I mean, it was probably 4 or 5 times as thick as your typical 7-inch tablet is today. It had an LCD screen. Its big takeaway was that it could recognize your handwriting, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing else could do that right then. Well, immediately after that, the Palm Pilots started to come out. Palm started to bring out theirs, and they did the flip side. Their device was literally handheld size, still LCD screen, but you had to learn how it wrote rather than it learning yours. It used to use a thing called graffiti,
Right.
which were modified alphabetic characters. And anyone who's a hardcore Palm person or Palm OS person will likely tell you that they could write in graffiti faster than they could probably print normally on a piece of paper. Yeah, it was crazy. I don't
Not
know
only
what it
that,
was about.
I can tell you to this day, I blame the
Mhm.
fact that you cannot read anything that I handwrite to graffiti. Okay,
Yeah,
if I
I
and
can
I
believe that.
and I should stop trying to handwrite and do graffiti when I do. That will be way more effective. I will be able to read
That would be an interesting experiment for a
I'll never
handwriting
try that.
recognition tablet today to see if it would recognize graffiti. Now, and this is one of the things that was also kind of strange about graffiti. I mean, this is going down that graffiti rabbit hole. You weren't writing in a straight line. You were writing the same character in the same space over, or all the characters were just going in the same box, and you were writing it letter by letter, and it progressed, but it worked. That's the thing that was amazing, is it worked within hours. Once you started to learn with that stylus, you could just start cranking things out. And remember what was also in play during that time period were, as we started to get into Blackberries, when we started to have wireless connectivity on these devices, now you had a Blackberry with a built-in keyboard, but you still had available to you Palm devices that did not. But then you started to get into Palm devices that did, like the Trio, and the Trio, or the Handspring Trio, which had a keyboard but it also ran Palm OS. So this was an interesting time period because this entire PDA mindset was really trying to settle itself out. And notice through all of this, we haven't talked about anything that they actually did.
Mhm.
All of these devices, at least the successful ones, specifically around Palm, were set up with docking stations to hook to a PC so that you could have your calendar in your pocket. You could take notes in your pocket and then have it synced back to your computer. You could have your contact listing. All of the things that you would want on a daily basis that you would normally have on paper, you now had, again, in your pocket. And that's really what kind of pushed this ball forward. When you look at the other devices that started to play in the same space, Nokia had one that had cell phone capability in it, what they called the 9000 communicator. Uh,
Mhm.
those, as they evolved, really are the forebearers to modern smartphones. And people will make the argument that, oh, wait, they didn't have connectivity. I disagree completely. I don't think we have the modern smartphones that we have without the predecessor of these kinds of PDA devices.
Well,
Be-
and actually, I'm going to say we look from the problem is we look at from the perspective of today, not from
yes.
the perspective of the time. And the reason I said that is my Palm Pilot had a thing that I could connect to a modem. Okay.
Hmm.
Yes, it was a very slow 14.4 modem, but it was a
Hmm.
modem. Okay. I can connect it to the computer. I was the quote unquote expert in Palm Pilot around my area, and I was a paralegal, teach a couple of lawyers how to use because they were impressed of that I could do things in the Palm Pilot, same as the iPad. I today teach
Hmm.
how to get the most out of your iPad, and it is was the same premise at that time. I was the expert. I just didn't know you could make a living at that time doing that. But the Palm Pilot, there was no communication. Okay, at that time you receive faxes. Okay, most people didn't even have emails at that time. Okay,
Hmm.
and we have a comment. Okay, you could even read ebooks. Yes, actually, the first books I read came from a thing called Pinaud Press that eventually was bought by Barnes and Nobles. But at that time, they scan and sell you those books way before Kindle, even Amazon even thought about going to Kindle. I was
Hmm.
reading digital books into that. And the option was that or something similar to the Franklin Planner, where you have that not a digital. You have a personal assistant notebook that has that, your calendar, your notes, your phone, and stuff that remind me one of my favorite stories with my mother. My mother asked me for a phone number, so I passed her my Palm Pilot, and she opened the thing and find the phone number. Okay, didn't tell me anything. Bring it back, the Palm Pilot, and then 2 or 3 days later, she come to me and say, "Did you think your grandmother could learn to use a Palm Pilot like yours?" No, that was my answer. But I asked why. I say, well, because she asked me today to find a phone number. I said,
Hmm.
okay. And then let's say the name of the person she was looking was Art Gelwicks. Okay, so my mother went to the A, my mother went to the G. Okay, it's not on the A, I'm not on the G. Well, okay, what I can do. So eventually, in frustration, my mother asked my grandmother, I cannot find Art phone's number. Oh, which letters did you use? Oh, the A for art and the G for goats. Oh, yeah, that's the problem. You need to find it on the C across platform podcast host. Okay, and that was how my grandmother organized those things.
Okay. All right.
You're
That's,
never going to find anything on her information, but that's how her brain works.
but
What
here,
made
here,
that very powerful is that you could search all that, regardless how that was the first. The search may have not been that powerful, but it was very, very effective.
and there are aspects of this. the mobile reading, for example, I used to do that on the Scion 3A all the time. I'd sync over text files that I'd want to read or articles. I'd copy and paste them and push them over because it was connected to the PC. We were talking about it in the pre-show. I was doing some cleaning up in my workshop and I found the original installation discs for the Scion Link software to connect it. And they're on 5.25-inch floppies. So that gives you an idea of how old that is. But when we think about the PDAs, specifically the Palm Pilots and the handsprings and the Sony Clios, think about what they physically look like, and now think about what our smartphone app screens look like. They physically had a large screen. They had a series of buttons at the bottom that acted as direct dock buttons to things like calendar and notes and contacts. Very similar in design and user experience to what we have now. The only thing that's significantly different from that now is that we've eliminated the physical buttons and we're using all virtual buttons. But again, this laid that groundwork. What I find is also fascinating about this time period, the big 90s for consumer tech was just fantastic because anything crazy that could be thought up was manufactured and released to the public. And you started to watch this split in the form factors for users. There was this trend along the Palm Pilot design where you had the Palm Pilots, you had the handsprings, which, if people aren't familiar with, a handspring looked a lot like a Game Boy in many cases, but it had a cartridge slot on the back of it for expandability. So you could get a modem slot for it. You could get a memory card slot for it. There were other ones. I forget what. I probably had all of them at some point. But again, it ran off of 2 double or AAA batteries, which was always great because when it died, you just popped the batteries out and popped more in. No, I think the handspring was 4. I want to make that. I think it was 4 double or
I
AAAs.
think that I
But
was going to
still,
say the
yeah,
professional and the Palm Pilot, personal and professional, were two,
right.
and the professional, the
The 5
personal
did the 5 was rechargeable. If
was
I recall
rechargeable.
correctly, yeah, the
That is
5
correct.
was rechargeable because you're right. The 5 was the first to really change the form factor up to an aluminum body design.
Mhm,
It had this tapered, almost like a really fat axe head kind of
mhm,
configuration, but it was comfortable in the hand. It fit great in the pocket. The stylus slid inside. It was everything that you wanted it to be for a very elegant organizational device. It was just extremely well designed. But where I was going with the split is you saw these types of devices evolving. On the other direction, you saw this evolution of kind of mini notebooks, this clamshell
mhm,
style design where the Scion 3A came out and the Scion, I want to say it's the 5A, and they had another design too that were like little tiny laptops, but they weren't laptops because they didn't have like Windows operating system or anything on like that. And then we started to see things like Windows CE based machines, which was this badly hobbled operating system designed to run on this little paperback book sized device. So we had those two. That path, that second path of that mini form factor, pretty much died. I
yeah.
mean, it's almost impossible to find anything in that form factor configuration anymore. And heaven help you, actually, if you wanted to use that. On the flip side, though, those handhelds, those Palm Pilots evolved into the PDAs that we have today. We just don't think of them as PDAs. And I
Well,
think part of that is because its job changed. What do you think?
because the job changed, and when you look into a little of the evolution as we were preparing, okay, I was thinking, hey, why I had the BlackBerry, okay, and I had the BlackBerry because at the time my job required a lot of international call, and BlackBerry had the walkie-talkie thing, and the
Mm-hmm.
walkie-talkie communication was free around the world. So
Right.
it was a no-brainer. You don't make phone calls, you talk on the walkie-talkie, because the calls at that time internationally were very, very expensive. It's not like now that you can do FaceTime calls and all those things. So that's the reason I remember carrying my Trio and the BlackBerry. The
Mm-hmm.
Trio was my phone, the BlackBerry was just for that use. But I never got into the BlackBerry because the BlackBerry was all about email. Okay,
Yeah.
text was not a big thing at the time. It was really for that people who was at that time
And
heavily connected.
the BlackBerry messaging. The
Correct.
BlackBerry messaging between BlackBerry devices is what really, because it was a secured, encrypted messaging, um, really is what locked BlackBerry into the business space, which, not ironically, is like blue bubbles and green bubbles, but we won't go there. So,
I am not saying anything about that, but that was a thing. And then you know we had a HP Hornada 512
oh,
color.
the
Never
Jornada
got
was
the BlackBerry. Yeah.
a great little device. It was
Oh,
one of those that when you pulled it out, because I remember working with one of those, and he's right, it was in color, which made it very differentiated. But when you showed that thing, people would stop. They'd go, "What the heck is that?" You could baffle people with those types, those mini devices. There was one that I had. If you want to find the most bizarre thing ever built, it was called a Vadam Clio, Vadam, and it's a Clio, CLIO, and it was a almost a laptop style configuration that had a fully pivoting screen on it. So it was one of the first devices that could be turned into a tablet versus a laptop style. And it ran, if I recall correctly, Windows CE.
hmm.
Really
I thought it
cool,
was Windows C. Yeah.
really ugly, but really cool. So that this is the type of thing when you look at these devices, you can see that nowadays, would something like an HP Jornada form factor have a future? Well, it kind of did, because all the thought process around those turned into netbooks in the 2000s when we had the underpowered Windows machines. And then we went from netbooks to the latest iteration, Chromebooks. So that evolution process has continued. But going back
Well,
to what you were talking about with the Blackberries.
going back to the BlackBerry, it changed the perspective from the PDA to really the communication. That was the first change from you begin to have a much more mobile possibilities than what you had before BlackBerry. And then as that evolved, the task component, okay, that let's be honest, I've been doing productivity for over 20 years. It has not getting simpler 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
We may have better tools, we may have better many things, but it is, if I'm honest, I don't think productivity, the problem of productivity, is easier today than it was when the first book of 7 Habits of the Highly Effective People came out. If anything, the problem is more complex because that promise that technology was going to make our life easier proved to be a hoax. And it's exactly the opposite, has make our life more complicated, not for anything else than the speed. Okay.
This dovetails perfectly with what we were talking about in last week's show about simplifying productivity. The types of things that we're asking to be able to do are the same types of things we were talking to be able to do in 1994
Mhm.
using Palm Pilots. Keep track of people, keep track of activities, take notes, be able to have stuff all together in one spot. The requirements haven't changed, but yet the tools have become infinitely more complex and more capable, but they haven't changed the problem. There hasn't been any miracle solution that has come through and
Correct.
solved all these need sets. And I think that's probably the most important lesson that we learn from this evolutionary history of personal digital assistants is that that little black slab of glass that you have in your pocket now is still a personal digital assistant. We call it a phone, we call it a smartphone, but very few people actually make phone calls on them anymore. We use it to access information, but do we really use it as an assistant for us? And I ask you to think about it this way: of your family, if you were to include your smartphone in the mix of your family, who do you spend the most time with? A family member or your phone? I'm willing to say probably it's your phone. You're going to spend more time than any specific family member. So if you think about that phone as the actual assistant part of, personal digital assistant, its job is to help you do everything you need to do. It's not just a doom scrolling whatever's on TikTok or Instagram Reels at any given time. It should be helping you through every minute of your day, carrying on that message and that ultimate goal of the early PDA devices, putting information in front of you that you need, that impacts you, and allowing you to manipulate that information. So thinking about the PDAs that you've had in the past, is there a particular instance or story or something that jumps out at mind when somebody says, "Hey, did you have one of these?" that you just find kind of defines that entire experience? I'll tell you mine. At the time when these were starting to roll out, when PDAs were starting to roll out, I was working for a community bank as their IT person, their web person. And again, this was early 90s. And the executives were constantly talking about, "Hey, I want to be able to get my calendar. I need my calendar. I need my calendar." Like, well, let's get you PDAs. And they're like, "PD what's?" Because they were literally just printing their calendars out and carrying the calendar printouts. I'm like, look, you're high enough in the bank food chain. We can probably justify the cost of these things and setting them up. So I got about 5 of them for the various C-level people, and we connected them to their machines and we rolled them out to everybody. And the adoption of those devices is kind of a microcosm of what we see with all other personal digital assistant style devices when it comes to users. There was one user who went whole hog on the thing, deep dive on it, did everything on it, lived through the device. There were 2 users who used it at its full functionality, but just did what it said it would do. I mean, they would have their calendar, their contact list, but they used it, and they used it reliably and consistently. And then there were 2 users who we configured it, and I know they put it in their drawer and they never took it out again. And that, I think, becomes, as I said, the microcosm of the challenge with this when we talk to people about using devices as PDAs. You have to take it beyond what you're being told this thing can do, or beyond what you see the general population using it for.
But
So
that
look,
principle,
yeah.
is still valid. Okay,
Oh,
I
very
can
much
give
so.
you a Palm Pilot, a Samsung tablet, and an Amazon Kindle Fire, and you will or not will. As when the iPads came out, and we have discussed this in the show. Okay, this is much further into this. Okay, I make the iPad my main machine, and at that time, people was like, "You can't." I said, "Hold on. If I was able to make the Palm Pilot my machine, trust me, this thing
Mm-hmm.
is infinitely more powerful than my original Palm Pilot." But on the stories, yeah, I remember, I was a paralegal when I got the first Palm Pilot, and I remember people getting frustrated with me
Mm-hmm.
because, so what I remember, okay, of that is you get to the core, you take the internal notes, and then you need to upload it into this CRM kind of system that was very, very slow. But then what most people did was they took notes on post-it or piece of papers or things, really disorganized, in a disorganized
Mm-hmm.
way. Okay. And my Palm Pilot allowed me to organize. Not only that, I have the beautiful thing that I never need to delete them. So I had a note for every one of the cases that I need to have on the memo pad. So I could sit with a lawyer, okay, pull my Palm Pilot out and tell them what I had in a second.
Mm-hmm.
For other people, when they got called, they got, "I need to talk to you about case 1, 2, 3." And it's like, hopefully I have in the notes. Can you open the thing? So I
Right.
look, put. So my work looks very efficient at the time. I didn't understood productivity or was looking to be efficient. Is just what I was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I could sit in any meeting, in anything, and have the answer right there, and I could search. And my crossover began exactly there on some of those lawyers look into how they could do what I do on the Palm Pilot. Some of them I
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understood the fun part of this until much later in life. Okay, but I remember a couple of them. Okay, partners of the firm. Okay, saying, okay, we need you to go with us to court, and we are going to follow you as you do what you do. Why? Right? And what they were trying to do is to understand how to use the device. So we did that way, and then I did
Mm-hmm.
that following them, so I could teach them how to do that. I didn't have the knowledge, the maturity to understand what they were asking out of me. Okay, I was 20, so, but I end up training multiple lawyers. They were my first coaching trainers into how to use that technology for them, how to and how to train then their personal assistants, physical personal assistants, so they could find in those Palm Pilots their information that they needed. Okay, and some of them swear by that thing for years until I leave the law firm. And after that was the same thing in college. I That was my machine to college. As kids go now with laptops and stuff, mine was the Palm Pilot, and
Right.
mm, I took notes in class. I had the foldable keyboard, okay, and that was my thing to take notes in class. And if the teacher complained of the keyboard at that time, remember that not everybody had a laptop. It was a weird thing to have a laptop in classroom. So some teachers
Mm-hmm.
complained that the keyboard was loud. So on those cases, then I do graffiti. And I remember when I bought the first pen that was the size of a regular pen, because the Palm Pilot, it was a little thin, okay? And I bought one pen that was the size of a regular pen but could work on the Palm Pilot. So I could do graffiti even faster than before.
Yeah.
But
It's. I was going to say
for me,
it's
was
interesting.
sorry, go.
I was going to say before I forget it. It's an interesting point because you're talking about using that in the classroom. Now, when we look at phones, there's a push against using them in the classroom. There's a lot of pushback to it, but it has nothing to do with the PDA part of it.
No,
It has everything to do with everything else you can do with the device now. So
but that
if you
was the
look at,
thing.
yeah,
Those devices were very limited. Okay, my first
yes,
laptop, it was very, very, very limited in what you could do. Not only that, you need to plug it everywhere because that battery was like
mm-hmm.
35 minutes or something ridiculous like that. So the problem is, as our devices get more powerful, our understanding of the devices are not necessarily more powerful.
No,
And
you're absolutely right. Now,
and
go ahead.
and that's part of the problem. When we change from desktop to laptops, it was like, okay, well, this is a portable version of the desktop. I don't know. But as the technology has evolved to phones, to tablets, to decks, okay, Samsung decks, and all this technology, not everybody has adapted their style of work to those devices. And
Right.
I remember when Michael Slewinski and I wrote the iPad only book, that was one of the first things we said. Your biggest bar of obstacle to adopt the iPad as your main machine is your addiction to the mouse. Okay. Because at the time, okay, not today, at the
Mm-hmm.
time, okay, people complain, well, but there is no mouse. Well, you have a massive 9.7 inches screen that you can touch everywhere. Why do you want a mouse? But it was that addiction and that thing that, well, if it doesn't have a mouse, it's not a real computer. I cannot tell you how many times I heard exactly that sense. If do not
Mm-hmm.
have a mouse, cannot be a real computer. I'm sorry. My phone has maybe 100 times more power than my first laptop. I don't know, maybe more.
As a
So
guy who cut his teeth on DOS and cut his teeth on text interfaces, don't tell me not having a mouse means that it's not a real computer. We're
correct.
not going to have that debate.
Well, but that's part of the issue is what are you doing with the technology? One of the things that I do is to work with people to learn how to use their technology, you know,
Hmm.
because the problem is just you spend $1,000 on that beautiful piece of technology and you use 1%,
Yeah.
sometimes less, and productivity is great. Okay. Again, I've been coaching, teaching, and consulting in productivity for over 20 years. But if you leave the technology component aside, okay, it doesn't work. The technology, it's a part because it is something that will increment the amount of input, no matter what.
Hmm.
Okay, you can ignore it, but the technology is has already increment your level of input. If you go and listen and laugh, okay, David Allen had a program, a Getting Things Done program called Getting Things Done Fast. I don't remember the year. It may have
Hmm.
been mid 90s. Okay, where he said, well, are you guys on the 100 email a day bandwagon? Because if you are not, you will get there. And when you hear that, I laugh. I say, okay, how about 1,000? Okay,
Yeah. If
but
I could only get 100, that would be
if I could
amazing.
only, hey, I get 100, and it's like, oh, it's a light email day. But the reality is, we need not only that input is not going to change, but if we don't embrace the technology, that output is not going to improve. And the PDAs, as we understood them, may not exist. But the reality is, the four things that the PDA came to solve initially are still as important, if
Yes.
not more important. Okay, the task, the notes, the calendar, or the contacts, and the calendar.
Hmm.
Sorry, if you take my calendar away, I'm blind. Our biggest arguments as a family, in my family, is you did not put it in the calendar. I cannot tell you how much time that discussion has happened with the kids, with the wife, etc. Okay, and even sometimes me, guilty as charged,
Hmm.
because I have 7 calendars, and sometimes it's on ones that is not on the calendar. It's on one that they can't see. So for them, do not exist. But that's a reality for everybody.
Well, and this is what I find most intriguing. None of those big four items that we talk about all the time require the newest, latest, greatest technology to accomplish. If you go out and you buy the oldest supported iPhone, if you buy the cheapest Android phone, you will find apps on those devices that do all four of those things built in, and you'll be able to do it, and they'll do it well. It's all the other stuff that this device now is trying to do. It's trying to be your TV, your camera, your movie studio, your game device. Everything that has nothing to do with actually being a digital assistant, it is trying to do for you requires this big heavy duty technology. But if you take that base four, the simple four things that you outlined, there pretty much is not anything on the market that cannot do that and that cannot help you do it more effectively. The problem we get into is we never bother to look at it. And we never bother to say, why do I actually have this device? Is my purpose for it to be my assistant, or is it to be my entertainment? And I think more and more we are seeing that shift to the second one over the first, where the entertainment needs take precedence, and then you have the assistant functionality that's like, oh wow, it can do this too. And that's where I think this is evolved interestingly. Look at the device that you have in your pocket. I am willing to bet that it is more powerful than any computer that you've had 3 years prior and back. So, this is 2023. I'm willing to bet that that device that you have in your pocket is more powerful than the computer you had in 2020, and go back from there. It's just because the technology is so good on these devices, it's so smart and so capable, but we're still only asking it to do very basic things. And that's totally fine. It should be able to do those and do those well, but that should be the first focus rather
And
than worrying
comes
about, can I get Hulu on it?
correct, and comes back to, from the PDA perspective, what concerns me to this day, and is, as you said, we can do all these entertainment fun things, but we forget what is the use of this device. And part of that cross-platform thing is what you do. And we have discussed here in the show that books Nova Air that I have. Okay, why did I got that device? Well, because that was a more powerful Kindle than the Kindle at the time. It allows me to install Google Apps from the Google Store. Okay, but it's still e-ink, color e-ink, so it allows me to see certain things in color. But it has, as you said, a very specific use. And I come back and recommend people, to do that technology card that we have covered in the show. Okay, what is your devices for? No, not all your devices are for everything. You may be able to access everything, but devices should have a purpose. And what's funny, because today somebody was asking, my main driver is an iPad mini, and the iPad mini died, okay, for excessive use, if you ask me, okay, because that thing is charged twice a day. I'm using it all day. That's my PDA. That's my book. That's my
okay.
That's my main thing. And as my phone stay on my pocket most of the time and has no alerts, no many things, all that goes to that iPad, and it died, and I replaced it. And somebody said, "Well, did you replace it?" I said, "Yeah, it died." And when I replaced it, it was very easy what I was going to need, because I was not replacing a machine that I didn't know what to do. I went to my technology card, and even in there, it says, this is the replacement of the machine and the reasons. I reviewed the reasons. Okay, they still were valid when by the machine, and move on. That is where you can get into this thing called productivity. This is where this cross-platform is possible. The reason you can sit in my office and see Windows machines and Chrome machines and Android machines and Macs and iPads playing together in a really cohesive cross-platform environment is because every piece that is being added to a reason. Yes, can I grab my iPad Pro and access everything or almost everything? Yes. Is their main purpose to access everything? No. Each one of these devices had a reason. And we forgot what was the reason, as you said today in the show, why we had a PDA. Even worse, there is people who never had a PDA, who don't understand the concept of a PDA. Okay, that their contact list and their database for contact information is their message list. Okay, that's how they have that. They don't have really information. I'm sure if I open your contact, your address book or contacts, whatever it's called, I will see art and the phone numbers and the address when you collect it and other useful information you have collected over the years. When earlier in my career, I remember as a sales trainer working with people and saying, okay, where is this information? The client just told you he likes the Yankees. And come on, and he just give you a valuable piece of information that you can use to create rapport with this person. And that was, they were looking at me, but I don't know where to put it.
Contact,
so
here's an interesting thought with that, and it kind of struck me. You're right. You think about the basic mechanics of that, something like a contact list. I wonder how many people listening to this don't know people's birthdays. They count on Facebook to tell you when somebody's having a birthday. And that's become a thing where you're like, I don't know, it'll tell me, or it'll send me a picture, and then I'll send them, a virtual card, and that'll be the extent of the interaction. But if you leave Facebook, you lose all that information. You have no track of that.
Correct.
Having your own pools of information, curated information, really is necessary to be able to go through and say, okay, I want to be able to manage this. So as we're starting to come towards the end of this, what do you think is a way, and I'll outline mine first. What is a way that you think someone could get the old PDA experience today? And my thought, and from the Android side, because Android supports launchers, and you can have different types of launchers, and means you can have different types of pages, home pages off of your device, you can set up a home page that has just those key apps on it that are the personal digital assistant apps. You can do a row of icons that is just your contact list, your calendar, your task list, and your notepad, and put maybe on that same page a widget for your calendar, and make that the home page of your device. Not junked up with all these different things for, Netflix and TikTok and everything else. Put that all off to the side. Put that on other pages and set it up so that this device is doing from its beginning what it was originally designed to do, which is to be your digital assistant. That's what I suggest you try. If you don't like it, you can always delete the page and go back to what you had. But it's an interesting experiment because you have the flexibility to do that on the Android platform.
So on the iOS, you have what they call focus. Okay, and you can create this focus in different ways. So, for example, I have one for when I get to church, okay, and hide everything but a couple of applications that I want to have access, and hide notifications and everything else. So, and in my case, that one, you can even geolocation. So as soon as I walk into church, that's activated. I don't even need to think about it. But like that, I have others, in the same way I recommend create one that is do not disturb. Block everything so you can do focus work. You can create one called PDA experience where you limit that. And at certain time in the day, okay, I have one that limit most notifications, more thing, because it's when I get into planning time. Planning time for me is around 9 p.m. And it's when I'm winding down and I'm not ready to disconnect. So that's, I'm going to read and reflect, and that's where I work planning time. So it blocks many of the things, but allows me to have. And you can set up and hide or show pages using focus to get a very close experience to that. The thing is, not if it's possible or not, is how much of that do you want? The iOS experience, same as the Mac experience, allows you to even say, what, after 7 p.m., I'm not going to access anything that is not PDA related on this phone. Okay. And that is possible, but it requires the user part. And, when I work with families, and one of the things I said is, what are the rules of the table? It's a question that I ask. And most families that I work look at me like, what are you talking about? What are the rules of the table? And they don't know. And I said, okay. So if we sit at the table right now to have dinner and everybody pulled their phone, is that okay? Well, it should not be, but no, hold on. It's okay or it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's okay, fine, then don't complain. It's okay. If it's not okay, then what are the cases in which it's okay? Okay. And it's very funny because I see my kids, me pulling the phone or my wife pulling the phone, and the first, it's an instant thing for them to ask, is that work? Because the rule is simple. If it's a call, a text for work, I may take it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But if it's not, phone goes back. And now as my daughter has grown up, it's very funny to see his little brother say, is that school related? Because he understands that school and work gets to the same level.
Well, okay.
but that's valid. That's what it is. Yes,
Sure.
those are the exceptions of the thing, and require the person who is pulling the device to have the maturity to say yes or no and be honest about it. Nobody's going to check, but you need to be honest about it. So,
Hmm.
what are those things? And it's the same thing. Can you do that on your device or not? The reason I have a powerful Kindle, okay, read the
Hmm.
books, okay, where I can read books and access my productivity is almost get to the level of a PDA.
Yeah.
This device do not have internet. I mean, has Wi-Fi, but if I leave, do not have internet connection. I cannot do anything fast. I can access my task. I cannot even access some of my notes. If I need notes, I need to go somewhere else. But it's a perfect device for that time of the day. Because if
Right.
I grab my iPad, then I have a bunch of other temptations. So how and I come back to that episode we did here about the technology card. What is the purpose? And as you thinking on that purpose, how those purpose fits on the day.
Hmm. Yeah, you can. This is definitely where the concepts of purpose of technology come into play, especially if you have, for example, a tablet in the mix. So you have a laptop, a tablet, and a phone. Is there a strategy then of making that tablet an entertainment and consumption device and moving all of those types of apps to that device if they happen to be the same platform? If they're not the same platform, you can probably still do it anyway. And then making the phone a dedicated personal digital assistant, that's its job when it's in your pocket. Well,
Mhm.
if you do that, you actually can use a less powerful phone because you're not asking it to do so many other things. You're not pushing its outer limits. So it does require some thinking and some strategy, but it still comes back to what we were talking about last week, which is the simplification of our productivity tools and
Right.
processes. And as we started talking about on productivity cast, this idea, getting into this series of what's the difference between a skill and a technique and a method
Mhm.
and a methodology, that understanding is far more important in my mind than what are all the things that your device can do.
Correct. Correct.
So now I'm going to go dig out my old handspring and see if it'll actually power up.
Ooh, I will be very jealous. Yes, I will be very jealous about that. So, as a closing, I think the PDA brought an incredible concept that technology and distractions has make us forgot, and for some people, they simply never met the concept. Okay, even it is like the I we have said this for years. It's like the concept of inbox zero. Most people do not know the have never seen inbox zero because the first time they open an email inbox, it was already full
Hmm.
of it. They never saw inbox zero. It is the same thing. Most people never experience the PDA. Most people, even to calendar, I cannot tell you how many hours I spend teaching people how to use the calendar. I have the blessing to work with very, very capable and intelligent people. And when you show them how to use colors, how to define colors,
Hmm.
okay, and why to not use certain colors. I had a client, and I will tell this story. I had a client, colors on his calendar. He came to me, he implemented, and we met the next time, and he was very frustrated. And I said, "What happened?" I now dislike my calendar. And I say, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, it's very stressful." So I said, "Okay, share your screen." So I shared his screen. We were discussing the color, and I said, "Well, work is red." And I said, "Why did you pick red?" "Well, it was the color I picked." I said, "I understand. But what do you associate red with?" "Well, importance and stress." "Well, of course." I said, "Okay. What if we change it to blue?" "Well, but it's red." And I said, "No, no. Red is stress and important. What
Yes.
do you associate with blue?" "Calm." "Okay. Let's do something. Let's change it to blue for a week. And if it doesn't work, we can change it back.
Yeah.
Next weekend, he came and said, I'm so mad that I paid you for these kind of things. Okay.
Well, yeah, it's the forest for trees at things at times, though. I mean,
But it is what it is, and we laugh about it. But it is what it is. It's very easy for me to see it and see the problem in
oh
his
yeah,
calendar. Okay, in my calendar, that's a completely
and that
different story.
and I think that's probably the most important thing that everybody should take away from this is taking time to step back from your physical technology and your virtual systems and look at them critically and analytically can make more of an impact on your productivity than anything else. Because if you're working the tools more than you're actually doing the work the tool is supposed to do, you've got a problem and you need to change it and you need to figure out a way to make it easier. And simplification is the best first step. Rather than trying to, I'll use a bad analogy. If you've got a cluttered garage, you never try to clean it with everything still in there. The first step is get everything out of the garage, get it down to something simple, and then work your way back up from there. And that's what we have to do with these. And I think if a lot of us, if we look at that little black slab of glass that's in our pocket, it is far too complicated to what we need it to do for it to be effective. And we can simplify what we're doing with it.
Yep. So with this, follow us where you like to listen to podcasts, like us or subscribe to us, and leave us a review. You can also interact with us on personalproductivity.club. We are Augusto Pinaud and our Gelwicks. See you next time on your favorite device. Thank you.